Hello everyone, my name is Andre Sargent, or as some of you may know me, Asarge, and I'm the solo developer working on Withersworn, a high mobility, high action, and high fantasy game aiming to revolutionize the third-person action genre by giving the player stylish dynamic gameplay that feels intuitive and responsive to every input and action. I have huge plans for this project, and I'm super excited to finally get a devlog out to deep dive into the world of Withersworn. In 2021, I started Unity, coding, and 3D, setting out to make a clone of my favorite game, Dark Souls. Ever since stepping out onto that first bridge in Demon Souls, I was hooked on the genre, and always admired the huge satisfaction that the world and gameplay provided. A fellow game dev, Big Brain Sensei, named Sebastian Graves, had a Dark Souls and Unity tutorial series on YouTube. I joined his community with the goal in mind of cloning the game completely before adding my own spin on it. Within a few months, I had successfully achieved a vertical slice of Dark Souls, and even added my own variation with mounted combat. However, a small unknown indie company dethroned me and styled on my grave with their own Horse Souls game that you probably haven't heard of before, called
Elden Ring. Emboldened by the flame of ambition, someone must extinguish thy flame.
After playing through Elden Ring, I felt more satiated than Kingseeker Framp's Lord Vessel for the type of game I was setting out for. Although, while playing Elden Ring and playtesting my own game, I felt one consistent desire: more satisfying movement. I'm a strong believer that you should put great work into a game's base movement. If a game feels euphoric just moving around, that means the player will at the very least have a great time simply going from point A to point B. In 2022, I set out to do exactly that. I decided to rework my game into one that felt extremely satisfying to move around in. This meant tight and responsive controls and actions that would flow with your inputs and expectations. At first I had looked at games like Mario, where you can acrobatically flip and jump with pleasing variations that respect your input. I reworked my base locomotion, and decided to use a kinematic character controller of the Unity Asset Store, as these have incredibly polished and mostly bug-free physical collision systems. And of course, you also need to have good looks to accompany good gameplay. I had some rough concepts that spoke to me, and decided to go straight into them without much alteration. While I didn't gather any references for the character, I would say I definitely had knights, mechs, and superheroes in the back of my mind as influences. As for the unarmored version of the character, his design has a lot of personal scars and markings, as well as some more specific inspirations. Berserk, Fullmetal Alchemist, and Princess Mononoke all affect me strongly with the character marked and cursed, their fate intertwined with the journey. Each Withersworn has a unique birthmark, which is where their power emanates from, but this is something I'll go over more in a future lore video. Being very new to 3D, I at first dabbled in making the characters with a more casual style, but figured if I shot for the moon I'd reach the stars, and decided to go for a more polished look. As the player character is an integral model for the game, I did more refined exact references and commissioned a modeler named Square Anon to rework it to that standard. At this point, I'm still unsure if this is the final design, as I may need to update the face rig workflow for cutscenes, and change the armor system depending on how customizable it may end up being. Overall, I'm very pleased with how it turned out, as the cape, fur, and resin lights create a beautiful performance while in motion. With this base character in place, it helped give me direction to the personality of the movement. I began adding custom jumps, dashes, slides, and interactions. I had the desire for flow, and every mechanic was made with one question in mind: what would be the most fun output? I had some debate thinking of going in a direction more akin to Zelda and Genshin's wall climbing and gliding loop. I love the freedom and exploration it gave, but I did have to admit that sometimes it just wasn't fun. When considering my base goal of fun movement, I thought of games I played in the past, which I would spend hours simply moving around aimlessly, as it was just that enjoyable. Building on my somewhat already satisfying locomotion, I desired for speed and the flow of action to be even more extreme. Wall running with other parkour moves and interactions with the environment seemed like a healthy evolution of that. Snowboarding and skateboarding games are also ones that I remember doing course after course, simply to do tricks and experience that rush of speed. This too is a feeling I want to capture and expand on. I think when coupled with combat, there's a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Although all these movement systems create a dynamic flow, there is one mechanic I coveted more than all: grappling. Personally, when I think of my most desired movement preference, I think of grappling. Ever since using Link's grappling hook to propel myself across dungeon walls, I've been, how you say, hooked on the mechanic. Nothing has brought me greater joy in life than delivering pizzas to the angelic Italian choir echoing through the skyscrapers of New York City as I flowed through the air swinging as Spider-Man. As I was considering this path, another game you probably haven't heard of, called Fortnite, had a Spider-Man and grapple glove mechanic of their own. The way they made their version was, to me, an even potentially more satisfying implementation, as it felt a bit more physics-driven and in the player's control. I decided to venture in this direction and created my grappling with full player control in mind. I want the grapple to respect the player's aim and choice, making it work in any situation rather than having a more restricted grapple point like many games do. To achieve this, I commissioned a Megamind coder named Keepatron to help me create the base grapple mechanics, which he literally did in one day.
You call this predictable?
I've since expanded upon this system and am constantly polishing it to this day. The mechanic has been such a welcome addition that the design of the game has shifted to consider it as one of the main foundations to the gameplay. As development went along, restrictions have lessened and the goal of fun burns ever stronger. Grapple thrusting and reeling to increase mobility, similar to Attack on Titan, were added to increase the control and speed for even more potential. And speaking of Titans, while Soul's combat still holds great respect in my soul, deep down, I knew the combat would have to be redesigned to work well with the newfound speed and physics-based system. Shadow of the Colossus is another game that fills me with atmospheric awe and wonder, similar to Souls. The further interaction you have with scaling giant bosses and simple yet deep world inspired me and also helped with the direction and scope that I could use for my game. I knew I wanted this freeing grapple and desire for fun and control to weave into the combat design. Enemies should be something you can move around and interact with, and eventually something you can manipulate with your speed and power. For an encounter to be engaging, it should interact in a way that is intuitive and expands your mind with potential. While I'll certainly go over this more when it's implemented in a future devlog, I'll provide a brief overview of what I'm expecting the future of combat to look like in Withersworn. The flow of combat will feature two foundations that the rest of the mechanics expand off of: a ranged weapon slot and a melee weapon slot. You can use these interchangeably in combat, but each are a tool for a different purpose. The ranged weapons will generally not pierce thick armor and can only take out certain enemy types. Think of this more as a tool to take out small enemies or to target certain vulnerable areas. Some enemies may even have a mix of these types, where you will have to aim very well to take it down, whereas your melee is a more efficient threat that will certainly get the job done if you can manage to reach them. While melee has not yet begun testing, the plan is to combine style and function. The weapon should respect your speed and state, with every action flowing together just as you would expect. I'm unsure what game to even compare this to, as I have a lot of influences from games like Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, God of War, Zelda, Smash Bros, and Souls in their presentation, but with kinematic physics highly involved in the flair. Of all development, the combat is probably what I'm most excited for, as it will tie the fun movement in, with a system I find to be a bit archaic in games. Many suggested I try Nier, which has a similar approach, but even with that amazing system, that I may even consider the peak of action combat outside of a few niche games, it still felt too restricting, where the action's outcome didn't always respect the flow of movement. Surprisingly, other indie devs are where I'm seeing similar design philosophies, trying to add more flow and freedom to the combat process. If anything, this is more so the direction you should expect, with the addition of grappling and states being crucial to the melee's outcome, instead of the input to attack that so many games seem to follow. I hope to create a spectrum of results that feels intuitive and fresh, unlike any action game you've experienced before. Another design pillar I always have in mind is creating the best result from the most simple implementation. I find with both the player and enemies that IK, inverse kinematics, can create beautiful results from the most basic actions. While this will be displayed in full effect far later in development, I still wanted to mention it as a direction I'm thinking of going. Just like the combat, I hope the dynamic output will be refreshing, as many games still limit their design around more static animations and behaviors. You can already start to see this desire expressed in the player's movement system, where blending IK is constantly used to provide fresh results that match your input. With IK, I think the enemies will interact with wonderful looking results that seem to evolve past AAA standards, and paired with careful design can be just as engaging and studied. Most bosses in games can be broken down to simple rules and mechanics, and that's how I want to approach encounter design. A boss doesn't need millions of movesets to feel engaging or complex, it just needs a vulnerability and to toggle the encounter around that. If a giant worm's weak point is inside its belly, you can bet your booty I'm gonna put turrets and enemies all the way down that worm's esophagus. If I want the samurai warrior to have a close battle with you, I'm going to make him have armor against your ranged weapon, and maybe a cheeky machine gun if you refuse to get close. I think the fine line between gimmicky and practical is whether or not you would expect that defense in the game world reality. This is what immerses the player more, and something I'm going to strongly keep in mind for the final design. I know when I post some progress clips, this desire may not be apparent, but trust me when I say it's something I think I'll be able to deliver on. During 2024, this is something I will show off a lot more, and can probably explain in a further devlog, but I do plan to have more turrets, smaller drones, and other environmental pieces that can help with balance and engagement. A simple one-hit drone may not be that much of an issue, but a big enough swarm of them is. And of course, to make this simplicity feel complex, it has to feel real. And to make that happen, I hope to immerse with the story and world. Originally, I was going to include this setting in this devlog, but as it's getting a bit chunky, I'll save it for its own future video. And speaking of the future, here are those plans. The mobility still needs a lot of polish. I'll be looking at the current Fortnite season's rail grinding and Attack on Titan mobility gear, as I filter out what can make it as satisfying as possible. More parkour off the walls, rails, and board are also something I want to elaborate on, and will probably be the focus on towards and through the summer. After this movement flow and parkour is in, I might do another devlog to update the process, but don't expect any scheduled devlog. These take time to make, and would probably be better updated in work phases. Maybe for more specific smaller videos like the upcoming World and Story I could, but right now my focus is the game. If you have ideas of types of content that might be worth posting on YouTube, feel free to suggest in the comments and I'll see what I can do, because I would love to share the process more. Melee is also on the horizon, but probably won't be showing up till either the end or next year, as mobility is the main focus. It, along with the initial enemy AI, is the final addition before the 2024 demo. But as a bonus, I can offer this potential early demo. If a single one of these are achieved, I will take a week or two to set up and release a free public mobility demo. Depending on when this is reached, I definitely may have some unfinished mobility mechanics, but overall it will be a great taste of the movement and euphoric grappling flow. The reason I don't have a normal mobility demo planned is because the melee is quite crucial to the feel and flow, and right now I'm not looking for feedback, as a lot has yet to be implemented and polished. Please remember to wishlist, subscribe, and follow any of the other areas you'd like. Spreading the word is the best way to help this game succeed, and I hope to deliver a fresh gameplay experience that enlightens the way you think of the action genre.